Chapter 44. Days passed while we waited at the hotel suite that had once been Jedgeist's home. Kurt Willis, the GI Paragon, had told my friends to wait a couple of weeks or so before pursuing the next storyline. Weeks. Was that a figure of speech, or did he literally mean we had to just sit around? That didn't match up with what I knew about the tutorial at all. Nothing we had seen about the tutorial referenced weeks spent twiddling thumbs. Then again, I had never seen or heard of an account of the tutorial from someone who completed it when it was new. I had estimated days at most. It was still the day before the centennial. We hadn't crossed that threshold yet. I wanted to find the time capsule in the mayor's office, but there was always something stopping us from getting inside. Dinah looked at the lock on the door and said it would take weeks to pick. Carousel was being adamant. We were getting our rest at least. That might make sense for rookies. I just wanted to be through with the tutorial and move on to rescues. I was alone in the storage room of the hotel suite where we had found the old newspapers with information of Guy's murder. The room had been reset. All of the boxes were resealed. Somewhere along the line, I got it in my mind that it would be neat to reopen them and see if there was something new to learn. So I did. I looked through every box all over again. They still had newspapers from around the time of Jedgeist's death. Nothing had changed, no new information. We still needed the fireplace poker to summon his spirit and interrogate him. As I continued cycling through the garbage that had been left behind from Jedgeist's time in the house, I took a mental inventory of everything. It was strange. I swore there were new items. Old items were missing. As I pondered this, Kimberly walked in and found me while I had my back turned. "What's got you brainstorming?" she asked. I looked back at her. "Oh," I said. "All of this stuff is different than the stuff that was here before." "Different? You think there are new clues in here?" she asked. "I can get the others to help look." I shook my head. No, that's not what I'm saying. These aren't important objects. Like this," I said, lifting a box. "There's a waffle iron. There was a waffle iron when we went through it before, but this one is electric. The other one was the kind you put on the stove." She took the iron from me and looked it over. "Okay. Is that important? So that means that this room wasn't just reset." "Not really. It was restocked. That's an important difference. We weren't gentle with tearing through these boxes when we were looking for the newspaper articles. Someone took away the trash we left and replaced it with all new junk, all wrapped in the same newspaper with the date changed because of the continuity loop." "That's interesting," she said unconvincingly. "It is. This means that there is a warehouse somewhere in Carousel filled with boxes that only exist to restock this room. That's not all. Smell the air." "Smell the air?" she asked. I nodded. She took a sniff. "It smells like a thrift store," she said. "And menthol. Jedgeist must have been a smoker." "No," I said. "Well, he might have been. That's not the point. The room didn't smell this way before. I remember. It smelled like mold and old people. It didn't smell like smoke. Check this out." I pointed to a stack of boxes near a large air vent. There was a small glass ashtray on one of the boxes. 2 cigarette butts occupied the tray. "Someone opened that box over there," I said, pointing to a different stack of boxes. "They took that ashtray and smoked in this room after they restocked it. Then they left. This room wasn't turned back to normal by magic. People reset it. NPCs." "Wow," Kimberly said. "Hotel workers?" "Maybe so," I said. "Isn't that interesting? Why would it work like that? Carousel has shown so much power, and yet it has people stacking boxes filled with old junk so that players can look through them to find these newspapers. It's crazy." "Yeah," she said. She tried to sound as enthusiastic as I was. "But there's nothing for us back here?" "No." She waited for a moment and then asked, "Riley, why are you back here?" The question caught me off guard. "I just told you. We're in the living room, and we're having a good time, all things considered. You know we have to wait here for who knows how long. Why don't you come in there with us?" You said yourself there aren't any more clues back here. I could hear them watching TV in the other room. It was a football game intercut with news bulletins. Even Dinah's in there, and she is literally an outsider. You can't say it's because you don't know us. We've been here for months. If being here doesn't make us friends, what could? And don't say it's because of Anna and Camden, because you were the same way when they were alive. I hated being put on the spot for this. As I grew up, I found myself straying away from groups more and more. I'll come in there if you want, I said. It's not that. Look, I've always been like this. My grandparents sent me to trauma counseling and everything when I was a kid. It's just who I am. She set the waffle iron back inside the box she had taken it from and said, "Come on." The last thing I wanted to do was watch sports and relax. It was too early for that. We needed to figure out a through line and find a place to stay other than this haunted house. We needed to start rescues. We needed to raise our levels. We needed to get our friends back. Then, we could talk about letting our guards down. But I relented. There was nothing to be found in those boxes that we hadn't already seen. Frankly, if I refused, she might think I disliked them or something. That wasn't true. It was just that they didn't want to talk about Carousel or the through line. That's all I wanted to talk about. I couldn't think about anything else. Back in the living room, the others had pulled all of the furniture from around the house and a few mattresses back into the center of the room. They were watching Carousel University play the team with the Ranger Danger mascot. The stadium was having a moment of silence for those who died days earlier in the terrible flood and ensuing attack. A man I recognized as the dean of the university was leading the moment of silence. Even through the television, I could see he looked uninterested. He had done it all before. The moment of silence was over, and the teams took back to the field. "I played in a game like this," Ant-Man said. He had been drinking. I couldn't blame him. Demolished everyone. Best time I had in a storyline, hands down. We had kept the television on as we watched news footage from the aftermath of our last storyline. Unlike storylines from before, the damage and the deaths had remained, as well as it seemed to imply they would. The reports were light on details. So light, in fact, they didn't even officially mention the frogs. The only reference to those mutant abominations was from a witness who spoke of giant monsters covered in human skin. The reporter had dismissed this claim. Other than that, it appeared the deaths were canon, so to speak. And every few hours, the reporters would cycle through various stories. As I got settled, the feed changed from the game to an interview again. A reporter dressed in a tan jacket was standing outside the football stadium covering what appeared to be protests from the citizens of Carousel. Their objections were difficult to discern at first. "Impeach Mayor Gray," one protester yelled. Others were not so polite. All manner of curse words were flung. The screen cut away to a pair of newscasters. "Sounds like there are some passionate protesters down there. Just one moment as we reconnect with Jen in the field." This sort of thing happened all day. Newscasts in horror movies cut in and out without meaningful continuity. They were only there to reveal important information at the right moment. Then they were gone. Every time someone entered the living room, breaking news would overtake whatever came before it. We had heard most of the stories already. This happened a few more times. I sat in an oversized, overstuffed chair and watched as the news cycled between the game and coverage of the protests. Live at Carousel University Stadium. A reporter was interviewing a woman named Bonnie Hayworth, who was giving them lines about how celebrating the anniversary of the founding, even the centennial, was in bad taste. 30 years ago, she said, tragedy struck, and look here, days before the centennial, tragedy struck again. When is our mayor going to realize that this town is better off forgetting its past? Back to the newscasters. It's difficult not to be reminded of the 70th anniversary disaster that happened almost exactly 30 years ago, one reporter said. The mayor's office has issued a statement asking citizens to forego the customary superstition, stating, "We need to take the time to mourn our losses. Discussion of the centennial is disgraceful at this time." Ant-Man lowered the volume on the television. "It's chaos out there," he said. "I'm starting to think they aren't actually going to tell us what happened 30 years ago." "I am so confused about the timeline," Cassie said. "I thought the frogs happened in 1995. Now it happened in 2022? Perhaps that was the purpose of the constant newscasts. To make sure we had time to learn how the timeline worked." I still wrestled with it. The throughline was set in the current year, 2022, but storylines set in the past still affected the throughline as if they had just happened. Carousel worked in layers. The throughline cut through the layers, down toward something in the distant past. "Last chance for a quick game of reply the deeper did," Isaac said with a cackle. I could tell he was doing it to work through his fears, but it still made my heart leap. "Stop it," Cassie said. "Don't even joke." "I'm sorry," he said once it seemed he had taken it too far. Bobby lay on one of the mattresses, reviewing his new license, which allowed him to bring the dogs from the B&B into a storyline. After the conversation drifted a bit, he asked, "If it says not to seek her, that means she is somewhere to be sought." This solicited groans from everyone in the room. Bobby's license had contained the warning, "Do not seek her," which he immediately interpreted as being about his deceased wife Jeanette. He might have been right. I wasn't sure. "Please tell me you're not stuck on that again," Ant-Man said. "That is literally the nicest Carousel has ever been giving you that warning. Just stop, man. Just stop." "What if it isn't a warning? What if it's a dare?" Bobby asked. "Maybe I'm supposed to be brave." "In this case," Isaac said, "a dare is probably the same as a warning." Bobby rolled over and vanished the license to whatever place such documents and tickets go when we put them away. "This is the first time she's been acknowledged, is all," Bobby said. I wanted to say something to comfort him. I didn't know what it could be. I was the last person to see her alive, at least the last living person to see her alive. Occasionally, the others would glance over in my direction as if wondering whether I would say something. By now, Cassie and Isaac knew everything the others did. They must have been told when I wasn't around. I had seen Jeanette cut nearly in half by the axe murderer for quitting the game. Counterintuitively, I was not allowed to talk about it, or it seemed I would summon the murderer again. That was yet another thing I needed to understand about Carousel. Why keep him a secret from the players? Even as I thought about him, I started to hear him breathing in my ear. Fear gripped me instantly. Cassie looked at me in surprise. "You're incapacitated," she said softly, with a head tilt. I jumped up from the overstuffed chair and left the living room. It was time to sort through boxes again. I wouldn't find any surprises, I knew. Maybe that was half the point. Chapter 45, "Come here, boy," Bobby said. "You can do it." The tall wolfhound from the permanent vacancy B&B stepped over the boundary they were previously unable to cross. It joyously hurled itself into Bobby's arms. He nearly fell back onto the ground as the beast put its full weight against him. Bobby looked happy. That's all that mattered. We had trekked across the town so that Bobby could check in on his dogs. He fed them, played with them, and talked about his plans with them for at least an hour. The rest of us hung out on the porch of the B&B and waited. Bobby had been asking for an escort over here for days. We finally relented when the news told us the roads were opening back up. "There's still Dr. Pepper in here," I said as I sat back down in one of the chairs. "Otherwise, it hasn't been reset at all." It felt like a lifetime since that simple discovery of Earth-branded soda had brought me so much joy. "Something happened to Samantha," Kimberly said. "What a change." I wanted to talk about meaningless drivel, and my friends wanted to talk about heavy stuff. She knew something bad would happen to her. I could see it in her eyes. "Maybe she's on the run," Ant-Man said. "Staying one step ahead of Carousel." "Maybe," Kimberly said. I stayed out of it. To my knowledge, Samantha had been axed for helping us escape or something similar to that. Either way, I wasn't going to start theorizing. "How is the whole dog thing going to work?" Cassie asked. "Did the other players do things like that?" Vicious dogs are a staple of all good horror movies, Isaac said. Some of them, I said. Not usually the main characters that of them, though. He is not a main character, Ant-Man said. He's a veterinarian who specializes in large breed dogs. Well, Isaac said, he does have first-hand experience. As Bobby's license stated, if a dog got killed or hurt on screen, it would backfire on us, especially if our characters put the dogs in danger. That didn't mean they couldn't be used, but they were a liability. Still, I wasn't going to try to tell him that. So far, he had been pretty realistic. He wouldn't bring the dogs with us until we had a place to stay. He would tell the dogs to leave at the first sign of danger, stuff like that. I tried to be optimistic. We're going to the graveyard after this, right? Cassie asked. I nodded. We had some threads to pull over there. I wasn't as optimistic about that. So far, the little to-do list Carousel gave us was very scant and vague. Things weren't going to be that easy. After we waited for Bobby to finish, we headed back across town toward the general area where we knew the main guy's estate to have stood. It was hard to miss. The whole property was surrounded by black wrought iron. The Geist estate graveyard was so far away from the ruins of the mansion that I couldn't even see the building. We never even caught a glimpse of it. It was truly a beautiful graveyard, though. Truly. Not just in the way normal people might appreciate a solemn place to remember deceased loved ones, but in the sense that it looked like a wonderland where ghosts and ghouls could roam freely. Leaves blew in the wind, covering the ground in a crisp orange blanket. The graves were expensive and expressive. Each was a work of art. There were busts of dead guys here and there. In fact, there were all manner of statuary spread around. If the grotesque had been set here, we would have lost for sure. Street signs would lead you to different branches of the family, from the main Geist to the Carowes and the Madrigals, who were Geist cousins. The graveyard was divided between a section labeled Lost, but not Forgotten, and a section titled Forgotten, but not Lost, which was a pauper's grave from what I could tell. How generous of the Geists. Much of the cemetery was cordoned off, likely because they were sets for various storylines and not genuine parts of the Geist graveyard. It took us 30 minutes of walking under the overcast sky to find the main branch with all of the right dead Geists. None of it made sense. Many graves had to be older than Carousel itself, or at least they were older than the current claimed age of Carousel. The dates were worn down even if the names and strange inscriptions weren't. We found a large monument to the Geists who died in a blaze in 1984. Black humanoid figures danced freely atop a large fountain that had run dry years ago. They didn't have individual graves as I was hoping. Lillian Geist's name was on the monument, though someone had taken a chisel or something to it to deface it. That might have been a good clue had we come here first. There's nothing here, I said after we had investigated every grave. I meticulously wrote down the name of every Geist in that section, including dates. It would give us a rough estimate of who died when, but I had been wanting something else, something more. What were you hoping for? Antoine asked, holding Kimberly in his arms as they surveyed the gloomy grounds. I shrugged and moved a clump of leaves off of one of the grave markers with my shoe. I was thinking we would find a grave for Lillian Geist, but we know she didn't actually die in the fire. One of us would ask, if she didn't die in 1984, then what's buried underneath her grave marker? Then we dig it up and treasure or clues or something. I don't know. Antoine chuckled. Didn't quite work out like you planned, Dinah said. She walked over the graves like a ghost, reading every one of them somberly. These people bred like rabbits. There must be cousins, second cousins, all of their extended family. There's no way all of these people are Bartholomew Geist's descendants. I could tell she noticed the same thing I did. A lot of Geist children just went missing. Not death dates, just a set inscription pleading for their return. Doesn't really line up with a timeline, Ant-Man said. Geists were only here for 60 years. The town was only founded 100 years ago. If the story is to be believed, this whole graveyard makes no sense. They could have moved the older graves, Kimberly said. The ones with the dates worn off could have been transported. The mausoleums, too. That was true. Could just be props, Bobby said. A graveyard with 12 people in it doesn't work as well in a movie. That was also true. Could be that the guys didn't get here 100 years ago, I said. The Throughline story isn't supposed to be perfectly accurate. It's looking like a dead end, isn't it? Bobby said. I was hoping it would be more than this. We got the tip to go to the graveyard from a random NPC who Bobby asked for information. It made some sense that the lead wouldn't break the case, but still, finding a bunch of non-answers was disappointing. The only real benefit is that now I had a list of guys. In the long run, the trip was worth it. Back to the drawing board then, Isaac said. What exactly was on the drawing board? I forget. Do we have any ideas? All eyes were on me. How many times could I fail to have the answers before they stopped doing that? I have some thoughts. I'm still working on them. They aren't exactly organized yet, I said. Let's talk it out, Ant-Man said. Yeah, I said. Alright. Let's talk. I sat down on a small concrete bench that I only realized later was actually the tombstone sculpture for one of the guys. 2 weeks, I said. 2 weeks, Ant-Man said. That's what Willis told us. We had to wait a couple of weeks. He had let go of Kimberly, and both of them stood with the others in a circle near where I was sitting. Isaac lay on the ground, looking up at the gray sky. Strange. Don't you think so? Are we really thinking that Carousel is giving us a break? That's too generous. Ant-Man shrugged his shoulders. Maybe, but that's about how long you have before you have to run a new storyline before. Whatever happens if you don't run storylines? When the vets said they ran the tutorial, even the vets in the Atlas, they talked about it like it was quick. Too quick. Back to back, I said. So there's something special about this run? Kimberly asked. I nodded. I think that the vets ran through the tutorial after the throughline had been advanced beyond it in the narrative. Like there's a checkpoint for the plot, and once a team gets there, the stories from before stop repeating. That's what Curtis was talking about in the Atlas, Kimberly said. Yeah. I said. Which implies that this 2-week break is not inherent to the tutorial. It's part of the throughline. Once we get past it, future players won't get the break. That makes sense, Ant-Man said. I'm with you there, but that doesn't explain anything. What are we supposed to spend the break doing? A seance? I nodded. That's what I would think, I said. But we can't do the seance, Cassie chimed in. She looked like the wind was chilling her to the bone. Not without the murder weapon. Right, I said. I've been thinking about that. Just stay with me. The continuity loop ensures that it is always the day before the centennial, and it's always the anniversary of Jedgeist's death, every day, even today. The date of Jedgeist's death was always one day before the date on the mysterious centennial time capsule that got buried 30 years ago. The only day we can talk to him is the day he died, Ant-Man said, which is why we need to do the seance before things move forward. I pointed at him as if to say, exactly. But, I said, if that's true, if the trend we have observed about the continuity loop is correct, doesn't that imply that there is a gap between the date of Jedgeist's death and the beginning of the continuity loop? The actual reason for the continuity loop was to provide a suitable environment for Carousel to handhold terrified newbies into the game. Still, there also had to be an in-story reason for it. A gap? Ant-Man asked. I hoped I wasn't overthinking it. It took me a while to figure it out. For the longest time, I assumed that the loop started on the day Geist died. That would explain why the centennial never comes. The continuity loop started before it got here. But it couldn't have started on the day he died, either, because that would lead to a paradox, well, a bigger paradox than those inherent to the loop itself. The day after Jedgeist is murdered, the continuity loop couldn't be started up yet, not unless it jumped a year into the future, which it could, but that isn't consistent. The first day after Jedgeist died, was it the day after his death, or the anniversary of it? It couldn't be the anniversary of his death and the day after his death. This led me to believe that the continuity loop had merely skipped a year forward on the day of his death, making it the anniversary and the day before the centennial, but that didn't work either. Ooh, Bubby said. Yeah, I said. So the continuity loop, based on our understanding, must have been started between 1992, when Jed died, and 1995 when we ran the last storyline. I'm guessing it started exactly 1 year after his death. On the first anniversary. Bubby said. Right, I said. That's why it's always the anniversary of his death. That's when the continuity loop started. It is to be. And what else happened around that time? The fire poker was stolen from evidence, Ant-Man said, nodding. He understood where I was going. So possibly in a very short time period, 1 year after his death, maybe 2, but we'll say 1. The fire poker was stolen, the anniversary of Jedguy's death occurred, and the continuity loop started. You get where I'm going? You think someone ran the ritual to talk to Jedgeist on the anniversary of his death using the murder weapon, which is why it is missing? And that was related to the continuity loop starting, Ant-Man said. I nodded. You know what else? Bubby said. The time capsule. I nodded again. I was glad they were following my logic. The time capsule was confusing. I still didn't understand it. It took me a while to realize that the capsule was the only proof that the original centennial back in 1992 happened. The deaths that occurred on that day could be retconned, but the time capsule was labeled with a centennial. How did the time capsule get there? Bubby said, if the time loop, continuity loop, I corrected. Right, Bubby said, if the continuity loop started the day Jedgeist died, how would the time capsule have been buried a day later? That's how the dates line up, right? Answer, the loop didn't start until a year after he died. The original centennial did happen. The tragedy occurred. The capsule was buried. Except to most people, the tragedy was the 70th anniversary, not the centennial, because they've been in a loop for 30 years. They remember it because the disaster happened after Jedgeist died, but before the loop started. I shrugged my shoulders. I was hoping to reveal that myself, but I was glad to have some backup. Basically, yes. So someone talked to Jedgeist a year after he died, Ant-Man said, and that is related to the continuity loop, so, therefore, we need to figure out who was trying to talk to him and why. But there's just one problem. The centennial, I said. The centennial, Ant-Man agreed. If the sequence of events was, Jed dies, the next day the original centennial occurs, and a year later the continuity loop starts, then why is it always the day before the centennial? Why does the continuity loop always keep the centennial a day away if it already happened? That's why I always assumed the loop started the day of his death, the day before the original centennial. But if it started a year later, then why does the continuity loop care about the centennial? That should have been old news by the time it started. Can we get a chalkboard to diagram this? Isaac said. Not that I'm not loving the brainstorm. At the end of the day, Ant-Man explained, whatever is happening within the story of the Throughline caused the anniversary of Jedgeist's death to repeat every day, but prevents the centennial and any anniversaries from ever happening again. Are we sure we aren't overthinking this? Bubby asked. Maybe Carousel just thought it would be cool. I feared I was losing them and confusing myself. The point is, someone talked to Jedgeist on the anniversary of his death. I think it happened 1 year after he died. That's all I got. Where does that leave us? Dinah said, ignoring Isaac. All eyes on me again. I have a million ideas, I said. I was hoping you all would help me pick which one to go with. At the end of the day, we need to find out who contacted him on the anniversary of his death. Someone stole that fireplace poker for a reason and all evidence points to them doing the ritual to speak with him. That's kind of a problem, Kimberly said. Haven't kids been trying to talk to his ghost for decades now? It's not a rare practice. Every NPC will know someone who tried. That was true. We could be following leads for weeks without getting anywhere. I can think of a certain psychic who was alive back then and may remember someone trying to speak to the dead, Ant-Man said. Right. Of course. The solution was talking to someone. No wonder it eluded me. Cassie, Isaac said, sounds like you're up. Cassie looked confused. Different psychic, Kimberly said. The one from the town square. Cassie looked relieved. She may have likely stepped on Isaac's pinky as he lay on the ground next to her. In a town where everyone has tried to speak with the spirit of Jededigeist, we had to find the person who succeeded. Chapter 46. One at a time, Madame Celia said firmly from the doorway of her shop. She had been waiting for us. The elegant dress she had been wearing in the town square was gone. Instead, she was in a purple cloak and frock that looked absolutely pedestrian by comparison. Wrapping herself in her cloak, leaving only her skinny, bejeweled fingers exposed, she said, "Take a ticket and wait your turn. I will reveal the truth of your heart's desire." Isaac was the first to enter the shop. "I was just saying this morning how I wished I knew the truth of my heart's desire." Madame Celia and Cassie both rolled their eyes. "Sorry about him," Cassie said. "Ah, child," Madame Celia said, "you have the gift. I know this." It would have been more impressive if Cassie's psychic archetype hadn't been on the red wallpaper for all to see. We walked in one at a time. Something was different about the place from the last time we had gone. Her stock of items had been changed out, and none of them registered as omens on the red wallpaper. The most significant change, however, was that the Silas, the mechanical showman machine she had against the back wall, was far from broken. It was turned on and moving around in short bursts like a similar machine might do in real life. "Step right up and get your ticket for the marvelous Madame Celia," Silas said. "Get a glimpse of your future while you still have one." And one was the first to make his way to the machine and press the red button. Nothing happened. $10, Madame Celia said as she moved past us to the back room where she did the readings. And one looked taken aback. "I forgot we even had money," he admitted. He looked at Kimberly expectantly. She was holding his money in her bag. "Those are like theme park coins," Isaac said. "Where did you get those?" We hadn't received any money for completing the tutorial stories. In fact, we hadn't needed money so far, not even for room service. We had forgotten to even explain it. "If this costs money and players can't get money in the tutorial," Bobby said, "that might mean we aren't meant to come here yet." He had a point. "There are other ways to make money," Ant-Man said. I got the impression he didn't want to hear that this plan wasn't right. This could be an incentive to sell any loot you walked out of a story with. Maybe that's why Tar was in the cutscene from before, so that we would know about his pawnshop. I thought it was possible Carousel had made it impossible to complete the storyline entirely on the first time, so putting advancement behind a financial barrier made sense enough. Either way, I was excited to see that the game anticipated us coming here. I fished into my hoodie pocket and withdrew $20. I had little left from the storylines before the reset. I handed 10 to Cassie. Bobby and Dinah chipped in to get Isaac a ticket as well. We had never actually put money into one of the Silas machines before. Now it made sense why Carousel used all coins in their strange little economy. I was the last to take my ticket from Silas. It was possibly the simplest ticket type we had seen. Just a plain rectangle of paper with perforated edges like you might win at an arcade. It listed our number. Antoine received 0038 and each one of us received one number higher than the last. That meant he went first. He climbed into the booth with Madame Celia and her crystal ball and closed the curtain. I couldn't hear anything they were saying, even though I should have been able to hear through the curtain. 7 minutes later, Antoine pulled back the curtain and climbed out of the booth. He had a look on his face I only saw when he was at a low point, a profound sadness and confusion. He didn't talk to us when he left. He just got out and went out the front door. At first, I thought he was having a panic attack and needed some air, so he ignored us. He even ignored Kimberly. That wasn't the case. Kimberly did the same thing. Then Bobby did. Then Dinah, Cassie, and Isaac copied them exactly. I got the feeling that we were being controlled by a trap that prevented us from talking to our teammates between readings. That was the first indication that I should put my guard up. The second was that when I pushed myself into the booth as the last person, I saw a message from Dinah on the red wallpaper. Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky. Asked about son. Couldn't help it. Sorry, the message said. Either Dinah just dropped the ball or we didn't have free will. The truth of our heart's desire. That was what Celia had promised. Perhaps, we were being compelled to ask specific questions. Was this a waste of money? Could this be beaten? I closed the curtain behind me. It was time to find out. Child, Madam Celia said softly, moving her long, colorful fingernails over her crystal ball. You have been through so much. I know the question in your heart. Ask it, and I will tell all. I had to fight it. Or could I? If this was a trap, that meant Celia's stats probably controlled its effectiveness, likely her moxie. There was little chance I could beat her at that. Still, as the many possible questions began to form in my mind, I realized that I did have some ability to fight them. I expected to feel questions like, who's the insider? Or how do we complete the through line as fast as possible? But such questions never appeared in my mind. Either Celia didn't really know my heart's desire or the game was rigged to exclude certain topics. Of course, it was the second option. There were no doubts there. The first question that popped into my head was, do we stand a chance of rescuing Anna and Camden? I was so tempted to just ask it. I could feel my willpower slipping. If I gave in, I knew I would lose track of everything we set out to do. I almost asked it, but by some miracle, I fought long enough, and the question faded from my mind. What was my heart's desire? Surely that would have been it? But then, something deeper welled up within me that shook me completely. I almost asked the next question. I nearly lost control. Are they here? I wanted to say. Which they? Not my grandparents. Carousel had teased me about my grandparents multiple times even when it was asleep. They wouldn't be in a place like this. They. An image flashed in my head. No. I couldn't bear to think of it. Why hadn't Carousel mentioned them? Why wouldn't it needle me about them when it was such an obvious play? Why pester me about my fictionalized gifted grandmother or my horror movie-loving grandfather? Why didn't it mention them? It had to have known about them. Asked about son. Couldn't help it. Sorry, flashed into my mind again, Dinah's message from the red wallpaper. I needed a better question. Something that would help the group. I had to think. What kind of question could I ask? What was my heart's desire? I could ask what he looked like, the shadow I had caught a glimpse of. I could ask about that. I had always wanted to know. The police wanted to know too, but my grandmother yelled at them when they pressed me too hard. Who was it? Why had he been there? It occurred to me that tears were falling from my eyes. I could know instantly. I could find out right then. Asked about son. Couldn't help it. Sorry, Dinah's message repeated in my mind. Wait. That's not what I was here for. I don't want a reading, I said loudly. In an instant, everything went back down where it had come from. The memories faded into the places I had put them so long ago. By the time I left the booth, I could hardly remember. No? Celia asked. Well, you paid for my time. What were you hoping to ask? I took a deep breath. What was it we had come for? 30 years ago in Carousel in 1993, do you remember someone trying to contact the spirit of Jedediah Geist? Child, Celia said, my clients have asked about that miserable man's life more than I have been asked about soulmates and lottery numbers combined. You're going to have to be a touch more specific. Right, I said. It would have been one of the first. Someone who eventually figured out how to do it. They would steal the weapon that murdered him from the police and then use the bell from Reply the Departed, the board game, to do a weird ritual at his house. Did anyone ask questions about that sort of thing? Reply the Departed, Celia said. Oh. Her eyes drifted back into a memory as she spoke. She spoke with long pauses. I really shouldn't have told her about the game. I couldn't help it. I felt like a force beyond myself compelled me. It was originally played with a spinning top. The belle got popular later. She was an odd duck, that one. Had some strange stories. I didn't see any harm. Who was she? I asked. What kind of stories? Never knew her name, Celia said. She had some idea that nothing here in Carousel was real. I know what you're thinking. Mental illness, a palm reader taking advantage, but I swear, she was lucid and certain of her beliefs. She came into my shop one night right before closing. She spoke of being able to change the past, that all of this was some sort of story that could be rewritten. Strange ideas, I know. She asked if I knew anything about that. Someone who thought that Carousel was fake. That meant they had meta-knowledge. I told her that the only person I knew who ever spoke of such things was Jedediah Geist, who, for a period before his death, started coming to me regularly. His obsession with his family's legacy began to bloom after they had passed away. He wasn't so bold as to call the world fake, but he claimed to know the secrets of Carousel's founding. Of course, he was dead, so she was out of luck unless she could conjure his spirit. Why did she want this information? I asked. Celia thought for a moment. She was convinced that she could find a way to save those people who had died in the 70th anniversary accident. She didn't seem delusional. She was oddly calm and claimed she had done something similar before. Look, I told her about the ritual in hopes it would dissuade her. Speaking to the dead is not to be taken lightly. I didn't realize she would go through with it, but if someone really took the weapon used to murder Jedediah, then it seems she might have. What did she look like? I asked. 30 years old at the time. Understated, her hair hidden in a hat. I haven't thought about her in years. The world being fake. Odd ideas indeed, Madame Celia said. She was playing a character here. Obviously, she knew the world of Carousel was not normal, but her character apparently wasn't quite aware. Psychics are powerful, but they aren't meta. Go, Celia said. I have to rest. I need to know where the fireplace poker is, the murder weapon. I said. Celia paused. You already do. But how did it get there? She said before grasping her head and exiting the booth. I walked outside, dissatisfied with my meeting with Celia. It would turn out I wasn't the only one. Most of them didn't have Dinah's message to help tether them to reality. And one was particularly hard on himself. What did he ask about? I asked Kimberly as I saw Ant-One distant and sulking. He won't tell me, she said with a lump in her throat. I wasted my question on something stupid and vain. I didn't know that would happen. It just slipped out. What did you ask? She looked deeply ashamed. If I would still be young when we escaped, Kimberly said through tears. She barely even gave me an answer. She said it is not a likely case. I kept asking questions, but I couldn't get my head right. Before I knew it, it was too late. Perhaps psychics were a little meta. A quick survey concluded that Bobby and Dinah had both managed to ask some basic questions to help us. Bobby figured out that our path would open up when we knew the destination. He didn't even remember what he asked to get that answer. He had wasted most of his questions asking about his wife, which had confused Celia terribly and led nowhere. Dinah figured out that we needed to talk to Jedgeist before the next storyline. Again, she had wasted her questions for the most part and didn't even remember how she managed to steer back on track. Cassie and Isaac asked about their brother. They forgot they were even supposed to ask something else until we reminded them. I had more to tell, but as I spoke, my memory of my time in the booth got scrambled. I remembered the answers but not the questions. It took a while to explain things. We have a character out there that's part of the throughline and, from the sound of it, might know about storylines, Ant-Man said. That's not nothing. Better than I got. I still felt like we were far from where we needed to be, but at least we had something new to talk about. All I knew was that Jedediah Geist had better have some killer information, or else I was going to be very irritated. Chapter 47. Ant-Man lay back on the overstuffed chair I had grown fond of in our time at the hilltop suite that had once been Jedediah Geist's home. Every few moments, it looked like Ant-Man was about to get up and go somewhere else, but he didn't. We sat and had the same conversation we had been having ever since the second tutorial storyline. It was going nowhere. "That's it," Antoine finally said as he started to get up. "I'm making myself something to eat. I can't think about this anymore." At last, I had the chance to reclaim my seat. Or so I thought. I ordered room service, Bubby said. "They make pizza from scratch in the kitchens." Antoine plopped back down in the chair. "Thanks, man," he said. Bubby nodded. And so I never did get to sit in that chair again. What a pity. We had gone over all of the information we had gathered a half-dozen times. After Lillian Geist made her appearance, we were more certain than ever that the news articles attached to the junior high history display at the Centennial were more than just story flavor. They were some kind of checklist. Kimberly had written the information we had on the wall with a marker. Geist buys town, 1922, Bartholomew Geist acquires bankrupt township with help of Silas Dearcon, plans revival. Carousel revival, 1924, Geist seeks partners for agricultural, industrial, tourism boost, etc. film sets and criticism. 1934, Geist families film set projects and Carousel face local safety concerns. Asylum project. 1964, Churi's Geist's asylum construction speculated as film set tax write-off. Pageant win. 1972, Lillian Geist wins Miss Carousel, highlighting family's local influence. Factory fire. 1984, no injuries in Geist factory blaze due to upstanding citizen. Benson Geist plans innovative rebuild. Film set tragedy. 1984, fatal accident on Geist horror film set kills 4, including Carlisle Geist. Manor blaze. 1984, mysterious fire destroys Geist Manor during event. All family members present affected. Some of these were just background, but we still knew nothing about the movie sets, the asylum, or the various fires except that they happened. When we tell Camden about this, we're going to pretend we figured it out a lot sooner, I said. I pulled my hair as I looked over the info. "Yeah, everyone else gets to die and we have to play a game," Antoine said. Kimberly was still writing things on the wall. She was convinced that if we just saw it all in front of us, we would stop going in circles. She wrote about the events of the 10-second game and cold-blooded things. She wrote what the Paragons had told us and what Howard Halley had told me. "What are we missing?" I said in frustration. "Are we thinking that Madame Celia was talking about a player or something else?" Kimberly asked. I had told them everything I could remember about my chat with the psychic. "I think it's from the Thrilline," I said. She was in character when she said it. If she was talking about a player, I don't think she would have mentioned it at all. She had to be talking about a character in the story, someone who knew about storylines from the sound of it, someone who thought they could change the past by triggering one. Kimberly started to write things out on a numbered list. 1. Mystery Woman X changed the past storyline. 2. X also wants to save the people who died somehow at the original Centennial, where the time capsule is from. 3. Celia tells X to contact Jed's ghost. 4. X steals the murder weapon. 5. 6. Continuity loop. 7. 30 years pass. 8. Game starts. "What do we know?" Kimberly asked. "She does the ritual." "She had to have," Antoine said. "It would be weird if she didn't." "Which means the fireplace poker was brought here to the hotel," Dinah added. "Where Jed Geist died. But it's not here now. We've torn the place apart looking. We had literally torn it apart. The NPCs had to fix it. Everything smelled like paint. Why is this mystery person just now showing up?" Cassie asked. "Is there a chance we met her already?" "If we did, we didn't talk to her," Antoine said. "It was really late to introduce an important character. If this person was important, why are we just now hearing about her? Is it possible we just aren't able to beat the tutorial the first time around?" Bobby asked. "That's something Carousel might do. The first storyline told us barely anything about the Thrilline, and the second one was designed so that the Thrilline information could be skipped, too." No one wanted that to be true, but it did make sense. Carousel's first storylines were designed to be beatable without learning important plot points. I hate it when demonic interdimensional towns play tricks like that, Isaac said. It's just not neighborly. Worse than that, it's cheating. I'm starting to think all those protesters are right. We really should have the recall election. The leadership in this town is lacking. Would Carousel flat out cheat? If the information Celia had was necessary for a player to learn, then newcomers couldn't possibly get it because it cost money to do the reading. They would have to play through twice. Why cheat, though? Kimberly asked. New players are going to be so freaked out they have no chance of solving it. Why hide things like this? It's a fool who looks for a reason in the mind of a cosmic entity, Isaac said. It felt like we were missing something essential. All right, I said. We thought about it from a story perspective. How about a game perspective? We did talk about that, Isaac said. Carousel cheats. Isaac could sometimes get caught in cycles of evangelizing cynicism. We technically cheated too, Bobby said. I doubt any players in the history of the game were set up as well as we were to win. We did have experience. We knew what we were getting into. Project Rewind had set us up to win, and the Atlas often made questions of gameplay knowledge trivial. Carousel knew what we had done. How would it respond? We did cheat, I said. We really did. I turned to Bobby. Tell me about the script again. In the second storyline, how did you know we were headed in the right direction? In the last storyline, Bobby had seen enough of the script to know that the path of the story diverged based on whether someone ended up going under Dr. Halley's knife. He had made one of the hybrids capture Isaac in hopes that I would follow. We hadn't told anyone about Bobby's involvement in Isaac's injuries. That was a post-tutorial conversation. One script was titled The Fray, Bobby said. The other was titled Possible True Ending. That second one only triggered if the hybrids captured someone, and since you and Isaac did, we were on the right path. The ability to see the script made wallflowers incredibly useful. They might not help you in a fight, but even a glimpse at different alternate script titles could be helpful. I'm glad I could be of service, Isaac said. It's a good thing I just happened to be attacked. Isaac had been sedated nearly the whole storyline, so he felt very little pain. Hopefully, he would forgive us in time. What about the first storyline? I asked. Did that one have a true ending that we missed? Bobby thought for a moment. I didn't see anything like that, he confessed. That weird enemy Xander Black or whatever kept going off script. I don't even know what the story really was. There wasn't much to it. The pages didn't flip very often unless he did something unplanned, so it was a short storyline. That was my memory of the story, too. It was an uneven mess, not at all what Carousel appeared to have intended. Or did it accomplish precisely what it was meant to? The original first storyline was called Reply the Departed, I said. The 10-second game, which we played, was a reboot of that with the same props and setting and a new enemy. Punishment for Project Rewind, Ant-Man said. Carousel made a harder version of the story. Isn't that what we decided? Was that really our punishment? Xander Black had made things scary and hectic for us, but most of that was when he broke character. Carousel didn't seem to plan on most of it happening. This hotel room is the last known location of Jed Geist's murder weapon, assuming our mystery woman performed the seance, I said. But the poker isn't here. Anymore. Anymore? Ant-Man asked. You mean? Based on the dates of the printout for the rules, the 10-second game appeared to have taken place in the modern day, I said. But the fireplace poker, the murder weapon, obviously wouldn't be here in the modern day. Of course not, Dinah said. The hotel was renovated. In fact, NPCs were literally renovating at the moment we showed up for the first time. The stranger even pointed it out. Isaac sat up from his place on the rug. You guys just realized something important, didn't you? I was paying attention. Can you go over that again? Carousel didn't give us a rebooted version of the first storyline because it wanted to make things harder, I said. It was trying to hide something inside the original storyline, Bobby said. Yes, I said. The original storyline, replied the Departed, must have had the information we need to find the murder weapon, but Carousel hid it under an extra layer because we cheated. That would explain why the second storyline wasn't changed to be harder, Ant-Man said. Carousel was just trying to throw us off the trail from the beginning. Something about reply the Departed would have made this game too easy for someone who knew what to look for. Ant-Man was getting excited about our recent theory. We were starting to connect the dots where, before, there were too many to see a pattern. He almost jumped up out of his seat, but before he did, Kimberly ran to him and jumbled into his lap. He sat there eating pizza until it was time to pack. We had to leave for a bit, and it meant Carousel was liable to reset the place. We didn't know what would happen to our stuff if we left it there. The thing was, even if we knew we were supposed to play through the original Reply the Departed storyline, we had little idea of how to do so. There was no omen any longer. The board game itself had been cleared out when the suite was repaired after we played the 10-second game there. Where are we going exactly? Cassie asked as we were moving out the door. Pawn shop, Dinah said. If you'd told me that, I would have dressed up, Isaac said. The pawn shop sells items from storylines you recently did, Kimberly explained. Truthfully, I didn't know if this was the right path to take. If we assumed the things we were shown were clues, then the pawn shop made sense as a place to start. Getting there was far easier this time around. There were no omens to navigate, just the occasional construction barrier from the repairs being made to town square. Despite the enormous damage many of the buildings had taken, Happened Upon was completely untouched. The frogs hadn't even broken a window. That was reassuring. We entered the store to find that most of the shelves were empty. No tropes were for sale, and no specialty items were available. All the pawn shop carried were a few odds and ends. In the back of the store, under the games section, was the singular item in the store that registered on the red wallpaper. An old rectangular box read, Reply the Departed, a game not for the faintly hearted, to seek replies from the departed. We might just be onto something, I said. I picked up the box. On the red wallpaper, it read, Reply the Departed. It was an omen. I don't like it here. The trop told me it was triggered by taking it to Jedediah Guy's house and playing the game. The difficulty was, I'm getting goosebumps. That was a low difficulty. Made sense for a first storyline. Don't worry, a voice boomed from across the room. It came from a tall, bald man wearing a Hawaiian shirt. It was Tar Bellows, level 50. He was a paragon and owner of the pawn shop. It's hard to play without all the pieces. Tell me about it, I said. Tar smiled. Now, you kids wouldn't be thinking of taking the game into the old abandoned guy's place up on Overlook Hill Road, would you? Overlook Hill Road was the road the resort was on, the same resort that had renovated Jedediah's house into the suite we were staying in. Abandoned? Ant-Man asked. Yeah, Tar answered. It's been abandoned ever since Jedediah was skewered with a kitchen knife. Never mind. I thought that's where you all were going. The abandoned Jedediah's place. That was more like it. According to legend, Jedediah was killed with a kitchen knife. Willis had told us so. We knew differently. We paid for the board game and left. It just so happened to cost every penny we had. Chapter 48 excerpt from a Carousel Atlas the Soundstage. It seems strange that there is no entry on this despite the term being so widely used in the Atlas. Most stories are set physically here in Carousel. If you aren't careful and you ignore the NPCs trying to shoo you away, you can find yourself on the set of an active storyline that you aren't a part of. It's pretty surreal until you get chased off by whatever killer or monster is at the center of that story. Some stories don't work like that. After being activated, there's no way to find where the players went. They aren't physically in Carousel anymore, at least not the part of it we have access to. This place is called the Soundstage. If a storyline is set in a world that Carousel cannot portray in real life, like a dream, hell, or even the far past, you'll find yourself on the Soundstage. Everyone learns it eventually. It's common knowledge. The reason I'm writing this is because I found a storyline out in the Gormand housing district that acted weird. It was set in the past, maybe the 1940s. That much was certain. The entire district was still being built during the storyline. After we finished, I expected to find ourselves back in the modern neighborhood, but even as we left, the houses were still under construction. I went back there today. Still, the whole place is like it was during the setting of the story. We were not on the sound stage. Carousel changed when we ran that story. I swear it did. I can't figure out why for the life of me. Arthur thought it was interesting too, and he hasn't found anything interesting in a long time. Why was this storyline not on the sound stage? Running the story appears to have permanently changed this neighborhood. I wish I knew what was going on. March 5, 2017. Oh. In the end, I could almost understand how a stubborn new player could finish this storyline without believing they were in another world. It was so easy to think it was all an elaborate prank. Normally, we were supposed to have a paragon who could help guide us through the first storyline gently after dropping us off at the original resort. The second time around, we didn't even have the stranger there to help us. Still, I didn't think it mattered. We didn't need hand-holding. As we hiked up the Overlook Hill and found the little resort we had been staying at, two things became immediately apparent. First, we were in the past. The hotel we originally stayed in was being renovated to a more modern Scandinavian aesthetic. This version of the resort looked like it was last renovated in the early 80s. Most of the buildings were still there. They were just uglier. Second, it was clear that our sweet, Jedediah old manor had not become part of the hotel yet. There were no paths to the other side of the hill, and many of the trees had not been trimmed back. We would have to hike to get around unless we could find the actual road. We might be onto something here, Antoine said as he looked around the hilltop resort. We must have been. We made our way to reception. It was pretty similar except for the style change. I expected to see Mandy, the same employee working at the front desk that I had seen every time we came by here for food or towels, but she was gone and replaced by an older man named Ned I didn't recognize. We didn't have any money, and frankly, we weren't sure if we were even supposed to be here. We were sent here for a room because of the centennial, Antoine said, testing to see if the old story still worked. Stragglers, huh? The man asked. Excuse me? Antoine asked. I thought we already had everybody, Ned said. Guess you were the last to arrive. Stragglers. Let me get your keys. He turned around to a large pegboard, retrieved a large brass key with a room number on it, and handed it to Antoine. Sorry about the key. We still haven't updated things to the keycards. Do you need help finding your suite? Antoine looked back at the rest of us before saying, Is it on the other side of the hill? Ned shook his head. All of our units are on this side of the hill. We don't have any over there for obvious reasons. Obvious reasons? I asked. Yeah, Ned said, looking for one of us to understand. The old guy's place. It's not somewhere people would want to stay, you know. You've heard the legends, ghosts haunting the place, murderers about, and whatnot. That makes sense, Isaac said. Everyone knows ghosts and murderers stick to their side of the hill. Ned shrugged unenthusiastically. Anyway, we have room service if you want to call from your room. If you need anything else, you can call me. I would be happy to help. Thank you, Kimberly said. We left to find our new suite. It ended up being the furthest suite from the office. If I were new to Carousel, I would never go play a creepy little game in an abandoned murder house, Kimberly said. I doubt you'd have a choice, I said. Could be like the version we played where the stranger has a trap to trigger the story before we even get here. Could be the town just loops on ending until you go over there, Bobby suggested. Or maybe Carousel uses mind control. I had no doubt Carousel had some foolproof way of getting a group of players into a creepy house for a game of murder Monopoly. Still, it was hard to imagine. How would you get someone like Jeanette in there? Antoine unlocked our new suite. He opened the door, and we all basked in its visage. Oh my God, Kimberly said. It was not great. 2 twin beds, a pull-out couch, and a few old cots provided enough beds for all of us. The television was small, and the place smelled old and uninviting. "They really should fix this place up," Isaac said. "If we had to stay here for weeks, I would be spending the night in the murder house within the first 3 days," Cassie said. "There was very little space and only a tiny table for working out clues. I know Carousel only gave us the renovated guy's suite to throw us off the trail, but I am super thankful we weren't stuck here," Kimberly said. "We moved our stuff in. I stood outside to get mentally ready to go explore the Geist house while the others got unpacked inside. I examined the game box. And one was outside with me. Should we practice this game? I asked. Once we're in there, playing the game will trigger the storyline. I don't want to learn the game on the fly like that. That's not a bad idea, but there is like a 100% chance someone was murdered in that hotel room, so maybe we do it over at the picnic table, he said. And so we did. Here is how the game was supposed to go when you weren't trying to summon dead people in real life. The game included, middle.1 board. Middle.7 player figures, film buff, eye candy, athlete, wallflower, outsider, comedian, and psychic. Middle.25 murder weapons. Middle.1 bell. Middle.200 seance cards. Middle.1 rule sheet. Middle.200 ghost square sheets, which were just little pieces of paper you could tear off. It was simple. To win, you needed to capture 3 ghosts. You captured a ghost by finding its name, the murder weapon that killed it, and a piece of important backstory. You moved your character around the board, trying to land on special squares that let you draw a card. The cards might list a question you can ask, such as, Spirit, were you killed for money? Or a collectible ability, such as, because of their training, the athlete managed to run out of the room before the ghost attacked them. Occasionally, the card would say something like, there is a strange presence in the music room that lashes out against all those nearby. Any players in this room must go back to the entrance and reset all progress on uncompleted captures. When you asked a spirit a question, you would wind the bell. If it rang, the answer was yes, and you would learn something about a spirit, be it its name, murder weapon, or backstory. Until the murder weapon is found, any player can try to capture a ghost. Murder weapon questions stated, grab a murder weapon from the weapons cache. And then allowed you to ask, is this the weapon that killed you? A yes means that the ghost is yours to interrogate, and no one can steal it from you. A no meant to try again later with a different card and other players can still talk to it. The ghosts were just hypothetical. They came into existence when you started asking them questions. The rule sheet showed a picture of 24 missing posters, indicating that there were only 24 ghosts in the game. The game was okay. Might have been fun under different circumstances. It involved a lot of luck but some strategy once you realized you could save abilities to use at opportune times. If you were in the same room as a player, you could ask your own questions to uncaptured ghosts after they did, effectively giving you an extra turn. It wasn't until we played the game in Guy's old house that I realized how unnerving it really was. I told you I was no good at board games, Isaac said. You shouldn't even bring me to this next storyline. I'd just get in the way. If I'm going, you're going, Cassie said, pulling him along through the woods. As we rounded the hill, Jedgei's manor slowly came into view. It had seen better days. Some of the windows were boarded up, and the siding was falling off. The door still had police tape on it, but that had long been torn, and it just stood there as a reminder that a crime had occurred here. As we approached the front door, I pointed out a large plastic tub filled with newspapers that had been collected and delivered for a long time after Jed's death. Somewhere in these would be the paper with a clue as to how Jedgeist was killed, though new players would be unlikely to guess that. These were the same papers that we used to pad Geist's belongings and placed in boxes in the storage room in the future. The house had been tagged by graffiti artists many times over. Carousel must have a lot of gang activity, Isaac said. I'm starting to think this isn't a safe place to start a family. Door isn't even locked, Dinah said at a glance. "I'll still knock," Ant-Man said. He had brought his baseball bat, and he rapped his knuckles on the door. There was no answer. He reached down and turned the knob, which creaked loudly as it opened. As we looked in, I could see Isaac getting ready to tell a joke, but I beat him to it. "Maybe we should call housekeeping," I said. I could have done better. That seemed to have deflated whatever joke he was preparing. The place was completely different than we had seen before. It wasn't as run down as a meth den or anything, but it scored a 10 out of 10 in the murder house category. Everything inside was old, the things that hadn't been stolen at least. There was spray paint on the wall. The crown molding needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. The place was a mess. But that was not the first thing anyone would notice when they entered. "Let's leave," Kimberly said, at least half serious. "That explains some things," Dinah said. We had been debating on whether new players would talk to Jedgeist on their first run. If we got to the house and the fireplace poker was sitting there with an evidence tag on it, surely they would be able to talk to him. That seemed too early. That was not a concern anymore. Thousands, literally thousands, of weapons littered the living room floor and surrounding hallways. Some kids had organized them into concentric circles and other patterns. Knives, crowbars, hammers, ice picks, screwdrivers, and every other handheld object that could be used to kill a person lay littered around the room. Some knives were stabbed into the walls. Some were in the furniture. "Anybody got eyes on the poker?" Ant-Man said. "I see at least two," Dinah said. The odds of someone finding the right one on accident were minimal. "So new players fail the first time," I said. By the time they realize what weapon to look for, Willis shows up in his car to escort them to the second storyline, assuming they ever figure it out. "Could you at least pretend you're not having fun?" Kimberly asked playfully. "I smirk when I'm nervous," I said. We gathered around the center of the room and set up the game. At the exact moment Kimberly finished shuffling the Zayan's cards and placed them in their designated space, the omen was triggered. We were in the story. There was much debate over what tropes we would bring. Given what we knew about the story, we decided minimal was best. We wanted the unvarnished story. No looks don't last for Kimberly, no last-minute casting for Bobby, and no Deathwatch for me. I didn't even use Trap Master, so I didn't have to worry about being attacked. We assumed that we had already seen the enemies for this story, so I didn't need to see their tropes again. Even if that backfired, we would be fine. This was an easy story. We were just a group of young people playing a board game with Dinah and Bobby. As the needle on the plot cycle ticked from omen to choice to party, there was a knock at the door. Ant-Man answered it. 3 cute girls swarmed past him, giggling the whole time and carrying vodka and shot glasses. "You found the game." One of the girls, Brenda, said. They were all level 3 NPCs, nothing out of the ordinary. These weren't sorority girls. They were some flavor of alternative, maybe hipsters, but that was a stretch. I wasn't around in the early 90s to know. They acted like they knew us. "Guess what I brought?" one girl named Serenity said, holding out a long, thin object wrapped in a handkerchief. She opened it up to reveal an ancient boning knife. "My brother swears this is the real weapon used to kill Jedgeist. His friend was one of the cops on the scene. He says he actually talked to him with this." "We'll have to try it," I said. Serenity sat down on the floor next to me and hugged me tightly, the boning knife poking me in the arm. "This is so exciting," she said with a smile. She was very physically close to me. I was starting to see how Carousel might trick a bunch of new players to go along with playing a creepy game in an old murder house. I took my attention off of her the best I could. I could flirt with girls or commune with the dead, but not both. I noticed that the sun outside was starting to set. "Are we going to play this, or are we just sitting around?" I asked. "Oh my gods, I'm so excited!" Cassie squealed loudly. The 3 NPCs echoed her excitement, as she must have predicted they would because she laughed at their reaction. At first, I thought we were in trouble because there were only 7 player pieces, but only Serenity was brave enough to play. The others just wanted to drink and watch. Isaac graciously volunteered to sit out. I thought he was going to spend his time talking to the girls, but he pulled an old chair up behind Cassie and sat in it as if blocking anything in the dark house from getting to her. And rolled the dice, and we were off. He rolled an 8, which just so happened to be enough to get him into the hall closet, land on a special square, and draw a card. He drew a backstory question. Backstory information could be anything. As long as you got something, you were set. He showed us his card. Did the player archetype kill you? Pick a player character. If the spirit says yes, the named player will be killed if they ever interact with or enter the same room as this ghost. Killed players had to start over. He had to choose one of us and ask the question. He made eye contact with me. I nodded. He asked, "Did the film buff kill you?" Better me than the newbies, I guess. Then he twisted the key on the bell. The bell ticked, and then moments later, it rang. I felt something move over me. A shiver went down my spine. The others seemed to sense it, too, though nothing appeared on the red wallpaper. I smelled something vaguely familiar. It smelled like ash. It smelled like cigarettes. Where had I smelled it before? Chapter 49, Spooky, Brenda said as she and the other NPC who wasn't playing started giggling. Does one of the ghosts smoke cigarettes? I swear I smell cigarettes. She took the sheet with the illustrations of all of the missing posters for ghosts in the game and started looking over the entry for each one, trying to see if they were smokers. You may need to raise your standard for signs of paranormal activity, Isaac said. If cigarette smoke is a sign of ghosts, then every bar in town is haunted. Brenda fake laughed. Truthfully, Isaac acting as cynic here was good. We didn't need to encourage any plot threads that would pull us away from the game. My guess was that after Second Blood, the players stopped playing the board game and start freaking out somehow. That didn't work for us. We needed to play the game until we had contacted Jedgeist and figured out which of the pokers was used to kill him. After that, nothing mattered. We just needed the right poker. Dinah rolled double 5s and got to go again. She rolled 7 after that. With that roll, she managed to get her cloaked figure in the house, through the great hall, and into the gentleman's parlor while picking up 3 cards as she went. She immediately played one of the cards, which stated the following: the wallflower has a habit of following along absent-mindedly, even to their peril. Move them to a square adjacent to yours after you have moved. They must leave any ghost sheets behind. This gave Bobby a head start. The card was meant to be a disadvantage, interrupting an opponent as they question a spirit. The ghost sheets represented the ghost on the board. You had to be in the same room as it to ask it questions. We weren't actually playing against each other, so Dinah did this to help him. That's it, she said. No questions? Serenity asked. Nope. And so we went on. Kimberly only got 1 card and didn't use it. She was setting her sights on a staircase to get to the 2nd floor. I rolled a 10 and headed for the library. I didn't quite make it in the door, but I managed to pick up 2 cards along the way. You overhear the other players talking about you. Search the discard pile for any card with your player archetype on it and choose one to place in your hand. And, as a naturally curious person, you can ask 1 question twice in a turn. No players had discarded yet, so I didn't need to use my first card, and I had no question cards so that I couldn't use my second. I needed to make sure that I stayed away from the hall closet where Antoine had found the spirit that I suspected belonged to Bradley Spears, an enemy I had killed by throwing him off a roof into the clutches of vengeful zombies. It was clear that the storyline was not even pretending to be subtle. We went all the way around. The NPC, Serenity, got double 6s and said, "Can't I get in the same square as another player? I want to ask the smoking ghost a question." "You can pass by it, but you can't land on it," I said. And 1 was on the only square in the closet, so she was blocked, thankfully. She huffed and puffed and decided to follow Kimberly up the stairs. Being that she rolled better and rolled doubles, she made it upstairs in 1 go. She collected 4 cards along the way. The limit was 5 before she had to start discarding. She could only ask one question per category per turn unless otherwise instructed. When she got to the top of the stairs, she played a card that said, "You taunt the spirits. Place an angered ghost sheet in any room. Any players in that room must capture it, calm it, or escape by the end of their next turn, or they will be attacked." She ripped off a sheet from the pad of paper and checked a little box that said, "Angered." Then she put it inside the gentleman's parlor with Dinah and Bobby. "Come on," Bobby said. "I don't even have any cards yet." Dinah didn't say anything, but she did give Serenity a look that probably meant anger or annoyance. Things went back around. Bobby got a good enough roll to leave the parlor and pick up a card. He was safe. We didn't know if being killed in the board game meant anything. It was still the party phase, so we were safe at the moment, but we couldn't be too sure. And one rolled enough to get out of the hall closet and make his way down the hall toward the trophy room. On the way, he picked up 3 cards. Dinah rolled a 5, and instead of fleeing the room with the angry ghost, she moved toward it and stepped on a square, which gave her 3 cards. One of those cards was a lucky draw. There is safety in numbers. Move to the room with the highest amount of players in it. Technically, it was still the hallway at the entrance. She escaped by the skin of her teeth. Kimberly continued her way upstairs and landed next to Serenity at the top. She collected an additional card but declined to play it. Cassie had gotten a bad roll at the beginning and hadn't even collected a card. She got a better roll on her second try and started her way down the hall. She got 2 cards and seemed happy about one of them. We were still in the early stages. Soon, we would need to start asking actual questions. I rolled 4 and made it inside the library, where I picked up 2 cards. The library had more special squares than almost any other room, so that's why I went there. You may ask a question about the weapon used to kill a spirit, but as you do, you notice that the outsider is right on your tail. If you play this, the outsider can move to your room and ask about the murder weapon if you fail. You must be next to a window to use this card. That wasn't bad. It was another card designed with the idea that the players would not want to aid their competitors, which just wasn't the case here. The fact that it required you to be next to a window was interesting. Perhaps it guaranteed that it could only be used in certain rooms, or maybe it ensured that you were all away in the room before using it, meaning that I could not use it to set a trap as easily. Whatever the case, I couldn't use it yet. My other card was more interesting. This card can be activated whenever you choose. Select a ghost from the board to manifest in physical form. The ghost won't know it has passed away. Players in the same room can ask the ghost questions directly without needing another card for it. However, be careful not to mention or suggest that the ghost is dead, as this will anger it and cause it to attack. That sounded familiar. I must have stared at that card for a while because Serenity nudged me out of my daze. I started to figure out how this game must work. Eventually, this game must stop being a game, assuming you intentionally take it in that direction by invoking a real ghost. At this point, this card would either help summon a ghost or help players understand what to do when such a ghost appears. We had already dealt with ghosts who attacked when they found out they were dead. In fact, some of us had been such spirits. Serenity rolled well and moved into the servants' quarters upstairs. This was where things started to get spicy. She drew a card like mine, one that would let her ask a spirit what weapon had been used to kill them. Hers had no strings attached other than that she had to be near a window, which she was. She played the card. Instead of selecting one of the little plastic murder weapons from the box, she picked up the boning knife she had brought with her, the very same one her brother swore was used to kill Jedediah Geist. "Spirit," she said, winding the bell, "is this the knife that killed you?" The bell ticked, but in the end, it didn't ring. "Lame," Brenda said as the bell failed to ring. "You said that it was the one." "My brother swore it was," Serenity said. The third NPC, whose name was Keisha, asked, "Do you think one of these might be it?" She gestured around the room to the numerous weapons lying about. "People have been coming here since he died. One of these has to be it." Indeed. The game moved on. Bubby almost accidentally went back inside the room with the angry ghost but realized his mistake before he did. He managed to pick up 2 cards but didn't play either. Antwan made it to the trophy room and asked a spirit in there whether he sought revenge. That must have been all he could do. The answer was yes. Antwan ripped out a ghost sheet and placed it in that room. Cassie had a question card that let her ask a spirit as many questions as she wanted as long as the answer was yes. She was in the dining room when she used it. She followed in Serenity's footsteps and grabbed a real weapon. Of course, unlike Serenity, we knew the actual murder weapon was a fireplace poker. She grabbed one with a silver handle. I didn't think that was it, but I couldn't be sure. All we had seen was the rest of the set and a blurry picture. "Is this the weapon that killed you?" Cassie asked. The answer was no. Her unlimited questions were cut short. Kimberly found the master bedroom and ended her turn. She didn't have a murder weapon question. In playing the game before the storyline, we learned that asking the ghost their name first was a mistake, as other players could come along and ask it again, canceling out your question. The NPC didn't seem above such an act of sabotage. If you asked for the murder weapon first, you locked the ghost in, and only you could question it. That was our strategy. Unfortunately, I didn't know the meter of reply that departed. I was sure nerds on the internet would have it all figured out, but I didn't have time to. Dinah took her turn and traveled further down the hall. It didn't matter. I had other plans for her. As soon as it was my turn, I moved my character next to the window in the library, picked up a card that let me ask a ghost's name, and then used the card I got earlier to summon the outsider to my room and ask about the murder weapon. It was a good strategy. Dinah and I would both get a chance. We could each ask once so we didn't risk enraging it. I could then ask again because of my repeated question card if I wanted to risk making it angry. Dinah nodded her head as she moved her character into the room. "Wait," Serenity said. "Where are Brenda and Keisha?" She looked around the room. Sure enough, the other 2 NPCs had wandered off. "Probably went to the bathroom," I said. I got up to select another one of the fireplace pokers. There were 2 good contenders. Both were the right color, but I couldn't remember the exact trim. "I think we should check on them," Serenity insisted. We didn't want that. It was pretty clear that Carousel knew we were onto something, and it was trying to make plot things happen. That would be undesirable on many levels. "You know," Isaac said, "I think they ditched us. We're better off without them." Serenity wasn't pleased, but we pushed forward. "Spirit," I asked, "is this the weapon that killed you?" I held out one of the pokers. I wound the bell. It didn't ring. "I just want to know where they went," Serenity said. "Then we can finish. I know they didn't go out the front door. They have to be in the house, right?" Dinah quickly repeated my question but with the other poker. "Is this the weapon that killed you?" she asked, holding the 3rd poker. We waited long enough that I thought we had failed. Then, after what felt like an eternity, BRIIIIINNNNNGGG, I couldn't help but cheer. We knew that once we had selected the right murder weapon, we would certainly be able to identify the ghost as having belonged to Jedediah Geist. Of course, the bell could have just rung by chance, but that didn't seem likely. We'd done it. Now, no matter what happened later in the storyline, we had succeeded. We knew which fireplace poker Lillian Geist had used to kill Jed Geist. The same one the mysterious woman had brought to this house to talk to Jed Geist. With the right weapon, we could perform this ritual without triggering the omen because of our licenses. All we had to do was make sure there was no further information in the storyline we needed to know. Oh, and we needed to survive, but that goes without saying. We were clapping and cheering at having identified the right poker. It made no sense within the story. Still, we didn't care. Somewhere upstairs, a scream sounded so loud it drowned out our celebration. The house shook. It might have just been the wind, but it sure felt eerie. A door slammed as soon as the scream stopped. I sighed. We could rescue the NPCs now if we had to. Someone had better be dead, Isaac said loudly for all to hear. What a coincidence. First blood had just passed. Tope continued, thanks for listening.